Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to, of course, another album of the week. This, of course, is episode number 86. Now, today, I am picking the debut full-length album from cult Los Angeles-based hard rock / heavy metal band Sorcery. No, not to be confused with that other Sorcery, which were based out of Chicago and had some albums released around the same time period. No, this Sorcery, of course, again, this album right here, titled Stunt Rock, was basically used as the original soundtrack to, of course, the motion picture of the same name, Stunt Rock, which was a Australian mockumentary musical action film that was directed by Brian Trenchard Smith and starring Grant Page. So I've never seen the film, though I'm very curious. But right now, we're not focusing on the film. We are focusing on the album that basically is, well, the soundtrack to that film. Again, this is in many ways is, instead of just being just your typical soundtrack, this in many ways is also very much seen as also a proper full-length album. And this being the band's debut full-length album, this definitely is as well. So, before I really get into the actual album itself and a lot on my review for this album anyways, I definitely need to kind of go into some backstory about Sorcery. This band was formed in 1975, but I guess didn't start playing the Hollywood club scene, and especially like the Whiskey A Go-Go, until 1976. And that's where they began. They actually ended up opening for even at times Van Halen during their time as a band. So they definitely opened there. They played again. They shared the stage with many of the classic strip bands of that time. Again, being Van Halen for sure. So definitely, I mean, when it comes to Sorcery and their sound on this album, it's not really. For sure, it's not very much like Van Halen. It really isn't. There is more of that, again, that almost early 70s, but there's still a little bit of that almost early 80s sound. Almost at times very closer to the new wave of British heavy metal scene as well. There's a little bit of that sound you can hear on there, or at times even Y&T and Riot. So there's definitely some similarities to at least those bands and really just Van Halen, and there really isn't very much difference to at least Van Halen. There really isn't any similarities, but the only I'm just mentioning that is because of they shared the stage with Van Halen during the early days. Still though, as far as also the vocalist here, which is Greg McGee. He, of course, originally, before joining Sorcery, he was also in a band called Sudden Death, which had an album recorded in sometime in the early 70s, I think 1972, but that wouldn't see the light of day until the mid-1990s. And that's a good freaking album if you like that early, again, almost early primitive proto-doom metal, or heavy rock, or at times as well Proto-Metal. If you like that kind of shit, that Sudden Death record from the early, that was recorded in the early 70s, that has the singer from this band, that's a great fucking record. But since that album didn't get to see the light of day, in many ways this was his proper official debut on any record that at least saw some better distribution, was on this album Stunt Rock. So without further ado, let's definitely get into the 1978 debut album from Sorcery. So here we go. Now when it comes to the album, there's at least about 11 songs on this album, and of course all these 11 songs, it all clocks in at least around 42 minutes. But these 11 songs are Sacrifice, Wizard's Council, Talking to the Devil, Burned Alive, Book of Magic, Stunt Rocker, Mark of the Beast, Bird Song, Wicked City, Woman, and Power Mad. And oh my god. I mean, for anybody, if you call yourself at least a fan of 70s hard rock, proto-metal, and especially the early days of heavy metal, this is I cannot see anybody, at least a fan of that, not digging this album, because of this album just has plenty of fucking cool freaking riffs. I mean, again, this was released in 1978, around the same time period, at times even the first Van Halen, Stained Class from Judas Priest. And even a year prior, you also had the first Riot album, Rock City. And this sound right here fits, it definitely belongs in that same category, because this is just an absolute rocker. My god, just from the opener, which is Sacrifice, you already are just given it's a fucking blast to listen to. Again, just from the crunchy guitars to the shredding and the whole build up, and then finally get into the actual track. It's an absolute heavy rocker that definitely, again, just has that almost proto-metal feel to it, and at times it almost is very much a very metal way of opening up an album. And of course, Greg McGee's vocals, it's just perfect. He definitely has his that 70s wit to his charm of his vocal style, but it works. At times, there is some similarities here and there, I guess, to even Alice Cooper at times, but it's just mostly comes also from the lyrics on the sound. I mean, the lyrics on here, they're just absolutely over the top. I mean, especially if you're looking at a track such as Sacrifice or Wizard's Council or Talk to the Devil, Burned Alive, Book of Magic, to of course then Mark of the Beast and Wicked City, and even Power Mad. Every one of these just, again, I wouldn't say it's look how evil we are, even though it's kind of pushing it there, but it's more so over the top, where it's almost where they're not taking it so much seriously. It's just, again, it's absolutely over the top, and the music definitely, for sure, perfectly acquaints these lyrical themes as well. And of course, for other mentions, tracks such as Wizard's Council, Talk to the Devil, Burned Alive, and Book of Magic, then of course then Mark of the Beast and Wicked City and Power Mad. Oh my god, and Power Mad's a hell of a, that is a great album ender, because again, it's just a straight up riff rocker with a surprisingly a synth keyboard solo that almost at times is very similar to, almost at times here and there, maybe Rainbow, or at times even a bit of White Snake here and there, in terms of especially if I'm comparing to at least a track, Mean Business, off of Love Hunter, which is, in many ways, it does remind me a lot of that, especially the solo, the synth keyboard solo on this track just definitely reminds me of the John Lord's solo on Mean Business off of Love Hunter. So that's where I draw the law of comparisons. But again, besides some of these, these are the personal favorites of mine. I love Book of Magic. This track right here is very similar to Better By You, Better Than Me, from Spooky Tooth and Judas Priest. And it does have, again, it's got that same feel to it. Again, it's definitely more of that British metal sound, and it's a great track. This is definitely one of my favorite songs off this one. I just like it. It definitely has that new wave of British heavy metal tone to this song as well. I love it as well. Burned Alive is another fucking good track as well. Again, it's just a heavy rocker, just perfect. Another really good song as well I also really like is also Wicked City, which again, such a hooky track. Almost at times has a little bit of a crossbeat between the more rocker songs from Blue Oyster Cult and at times a little bit of Alice Cooper kind of mixed in there. It definitely has that very good combination, and it's an absolute great track. Of course, I know it's also named after a Black Sabbath track, which again, no relation, but it definitely doesn't have any of that feel as well. But it's a straight up good hard rocker, one of my absolute favorites off of here. Also, Mark of the Beast is another great freaking track. Just absolutely love that. Stunt Rocker is also one of those that, for a while it grew. It took some time to grow into, but eventually it's another classic track off of here. The closest to a ballad, I guess, on this album is the song Birdsong, but that's definitely more very 70s sounding. Almost very something you would expect at times from either Budgie or some of those kind of bands. It definitely has more of that kind of feel. Or even Uriah Heep, actually, for another go. And especially there is some Uriah Heep feelings to this album with some of the Hammond organ stuff kind of going on this album as well. You definitely hear some of that very Hammond organ kind of. It's kind of, I wouldn't say buried in the mix, but you can see it, but it's very low, but not buried. You can definitely, it's still very audible, and it does have a way of giving this sound a little bit of the Uriah Heep sound, or at times even Deep Purple sound to it as well. But again, it works, especially if songs like Wizard's Council and Talking to the Devil, which again, both have that. They're fucking perfect. And even Burned Alive has that feel as well to it. It's just great. There really isn't anything bad on here. Every song to me is easily just as good. It's just, again, a straight up heavy hard rocker. And since this album, while some of their the ones that they released after this are not bad, but they're not close to being nearly as this great. And I bet should definitely touch on to this finally, because I think I've said all I have to say about Stunt Rock from Sorcery here. This album, after this album, there would definitely be some lineup changes for sure. I mean, Greg McGee, I think, would be in the band until at least the early 80s, and then earlier there, they then, of course, had replaced him with, of course, David Glenn Isley, who, of course, would later on was sing for bands like Jafria and Greg Goldie. Of course, would work with them. But his start definitely began with Sorcery, and the material that they had recorded eventually would see the light of day in the year 2000 when King Fowley, of course, October 31 and Deceased, would release all that material that they had recorded with David Glenn Isley in like 1982 to at least maybe 83, would finally release that stuff and be given again the light of day. In 2000, it would be called Sorcery 2, which then that album is definitely a mixed match because there's some decent sounding at least because of how the stuff wasn't officially released back and at least weren't released fast enough in the time period. Trying to at least find a lot of that material. Some of it was scattered and it was was found on different other formats. So you definitely could get that feel with Sorcery 2, because some of it they found at least on a 12-inch record. Some of the recordings they found on maybe a little bit of a reel-to-reel that's been somewhat beat up, and of course a cassette. And so everything was all mixed match because of the fact that the stuff wasn't just really was good enough preserved on one format. Instead, everything was pretty much just scattered around, and it definitely was left buried in its vaults and either some of the band members' bedrooms or even a producer's bedroom, that kind of situation. So it definitely kind of it didn't get, because of that, it wasn't going to give you a great perfect at least feel of the songs. Instead, you were gonna get more of a herky-jerky feel with at least with the recording quality and so on of that album. But it was definitely good for what it was. It was a decent look into at least the time when David Glenn Isley was in Sorcery. But as a proper release, it for sure kind of falls a little bit flat on that. But that was that, and after that, eventually they would get Greg McGee back in the band. However, for the time, which I then should definitely talk about this. I also have it. I pretty much have at least both the 3 releases from Sorcery here, but after that, before they had gotten Greg McGee, they of course had contributed to another soundtrack. That is the infamous Rocktober Blood soundtrack, which that in many ways, compared to Stunt Rock, was more of a soundtrack than really a actual full record from Sorcery, because it was pretty much mostly Sorcery with at least contribute being guest, having guest musicians. 2 at least. Mostly the guest musicians were at least singers. And I'll definitely touch on that real quick here, but it was pretty much Sorcery and Face Down, which was actually Susie Rose's band, which of course she would be one of the guest musicians of one of the Sorcery tracks on there, but for the most part, the singer, at least the male singer that sings on the Sorcery tracks, was none other than Nigel Benjamin, which was as best known for singing in the band that originally was Mott the Hoople, which was Mott, the band that at least Mott the Hoople turned into. So basically, that he was singing for at least them. So that's what he was best known for singing with, and then of course that's where he's ended up working with Sorcery for at least the stuff on Rocktober Blood. So that was pretty much it for at least Sorcery there, and then eventually they would get Greg McGee back in 1984, and I think till then since then they've only done here and there sporadic reunion shows and so on, but I don't think they at least are completely back together. And of course right now at the pandemic, how would you expect them at this point? It'd be cool for them to get and record another album. It'd be interesting if they would, but I don't think if that might end up being the case. Still though, what we got here is at least one really good freaking record from this band. Stunt Rock is definitely one of the best 70s hard rock albums of its time. At times also one of the best early metal records, proto-metal records, whatever you want to refer to as. It's definitely just one of the best records of that time period, and I think it definitely deserves a lot more talk. It deserves a lot more appreciation. I think it's definitely a great album from us. So there we go. There's that. If you haven't heard this band, or at least heard this album, I definitely recommend it. But if you have, definitely let me know about your thoughts in the comment section below. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed. This is very Thrash Sam out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.